In Lower Manhattan, New York City's subway stations start to congregate closer together and bunch up. You even have some significant transfer stations like Fulton Street and Canal Street. However, even with all these stations, there is one that sort of seems, well, lonely, Broad Street. This station, which is on the Nassau Street line of the J and Z trains, is the terminus of the line, yet for some reason it just seems too unusual and weird for it to be a last stop in an area where there's a whole spaghetti of subway lines. The line sort of just ends abruptly. Sure, both Wall Street stations are somewhat nearby, but Broad Street doesn't even have transfers to them, or any other line for that matter. Even South Ferry on the 1 train, which is also a terminal in Lower Manhattan, has a transfer to Whitehall Street on the RNW. On a map, it looks as if the Nassau Street line could actually continue past Broad Street Station. Well, this was once actually the case. Our story begins on March 19th, 1913. If you're a regular on this channel, then you would know by now that this was the day the dual contracts was signed. The Brooklyn Rapid Transit, along with the Interborough Rapid Transit, signed an agreement with the city to construct new subway lines. The BRT was part of Contract 4, with the IRT managing the first 3, but in this case, we would be following the BRT. Now one of the new lines for the BRT would be the Nassau Street line, which prior to the dual contracts terminated at Chambers Street Station. The contracts would extend this line. However, construction on the line never started, and by 1924, most of the lines under the dual contracts had been completed, but not the Nassau Street line. The mayor at the time, John Hyland, refused to greenlight its construction, but then his successor, James Walker, eventually did provide support, so work finally began. The project was to be finished within 39 months, and by March of 1929, 60% of the line had been finished. The construction process came with challenges. Since the subway floor was only 20 feet below Nassau Street, some 89 buildings would have to be supported with stronger material. The line also had to be 20 feet below the already existing IRT's Lexington Avenue line. The separate subway companies during the 20th century usually tried blocking each other's tunnels and track with their own, and this instance was no exception. Another challenge was that during the construction, quicksand and water was found in the way between John Street and Broad Street. Also, construction would have to be done at night, so as to not disturb workers in the financial district, where the line was located. The whole project ended up costing over $10 million, just for it to be 0.9 miles. Now Broad Street Station opened along with the rest of the Nassau Street line on May 29, 1931. Its Fulton Street Station also opened on that day as well. Now where this line used to go further was beyond Broad Street Station, as part of the Nassau Street Loop. What originally happened was that trains could go past Broad Street and actually merge with the Broadway line just before the Montague Street Tunnel. After that, trains could then run into Brooklyn. When coming the other direction, trains could use the Manhattan Bridge to arrive back in Manhattan, and then use tunnels, which are now abandoned, to merge back onto the Nassau Street line, and back to Broad Street Station, where it could go back to Brooklyn once again. So as you can see, Broad Street was once a through stop. Unfortunately, in 1967, following the opening of the Christie Street connection, which allowed Manhattan Bridge trains to connect to the 6th Avenue line and provided a new way to the Nassau Street line through Delancey Street Station, caused the Nassau Street Loop to be cut off. The Christie Street connection and the Nassau Street Loop have more to their history that I want to save for future videos. But anyways, the tracks from the Nassau Street line to the Manhattan Bridge were abandoned, but the tracks beyond Broad Street Station would still be used by the Brown M train for services to the Brighton line and the 4th Avenue line. This would continue until June of 2010, when the now orange M was rerouted onto the 6th Avenue line. This was when Broad Street Station became just a terminal served by J and Z trains. Today, this station continues to serve the Nassau Street line with over 2 million passengers using it in 2019. The layout here is 2 tracks with 2 side platforms, an unusual layout for a last stop on a subway line, but again, this was once a through stop and not a terminal. The station is located on the Broad Street and Nassau Street. Now usually, subway stations are named after one of its cross streets. This station had Wall Street as one of them, but there were already 2 other Wall Street stations that opened, and they were both on the IRT. So, the BMT just went with Broad Street, which the tracks were running under. Now, if you go to the very end of the platforms, you can still look into the tunnels that lead to the Broadway line and the Montague Street Tunnel. The tracks are still in place, just not used anymore. And if you're ever on an R train just beyond Whitehall Street Station, look to your left on the southbound train, or to your right on the northbound train to see those same tunnels. Heading out of Broad Street Station, you find yourself surrounded by, well, a lot of buildings and skyscrapers. This is the financial district, where many of New York City's financial institutions are located, such as Wall Street. However, it just doesn't look like where a terminal to a subway line would be at. It seems like you're just in the middle of nowhere, well, in Manhattan terms, that is. However, there was one major event that happened around here. On the 30th of April 1789, George Washington took the oath of office as the first president of the United States, here on the balcony of the Federal Hall, a building that still stands. So that was the video on one of the quirkiest stops on the New York City subway. If my commentary sounds a little rushed, then it's because this was sort of a last-minute video I came up with, but I found the story of Broad Street Station interesting enough that I wanted to make a video about it right away. My next video could potentially be about the opening of the East Side Axis, so consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel. I'll see you next time.